Hi, I'm Sean, and this is my roommate JT.
How you doing?
Today, we're going to learn how to use computers to help us be productive and stay healthy. Stay tuned. So, my task today for Udacity is to teach somebody how to write a program.
Excellent.
We're going to write a program that reminds us to take a break when we've been sitting down too long at the computer. This is the video. I guess I should have shown you this before we started.
Now, before we write that program, let me ask you, if you were writing the take a break program, what steps would you take to get to the output?
Right, so, steps. Well, I guess first, JT, have you ever heard of Python?
No.
No?
No.
It's a computer programming language. It's not the snake. But, so, we're going to use a language called Python to write this program. But first, let's think about it in plain English. What do we need to do, code aside, to logically start a timer, open a browser, and do it every 2 hours? Any thoughts?
You need to set an internal clock on the program.
That's correct. First, we need to figure out how do we access the internal clock of the
Okay.
computer. So, figure out how to access my computer's time clock. And then we're going to need to do something with that time, and I think we want to take a break every 2 hours.
Right.
So we need to write code that waits for 2 hours. Then what we need to do with that is open our favorite YouTube video, or at least one that reminds us to take a break in the browser. So then we would need to figure out how to open the website in our browser with Python. Not Python, but Python. And then we would need to reset that timer every time. So after the first 2 hours, we want to say, okay, we're taking a break now, but 2 hours, in another 2 hours, we want that same thing to happen. And we probably want to take 3 breaks in our 8-hour workday. So we would loop over the function that we created, or that we're going to create, 3 times, and make sure it does the same thing every time. So, luckily for us, and because you have to go to work soon, I already wrote the program.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, with some help from Udacity. So I think we're done here. No, wait. We should probably explain how this works.
Yes.
So this is a lot of code. Does this code make any sense to you, JT?
Absolutely not.
Do you like taking breaks?
Of course.
Then we need to learn how this code works. Here at the top, I have basically a text editor that's designed for code. It highlights things, and down at the bottom I have a console. So a console is like the interpreter that runs your program. So I've already saved this file to a specific place so that when I go in this console and run it, it's actually running and stepping through all of this code just from the top to the bottom. We'll write some code, and then we'll go up and use this program to run the code that we wrote, and we'll see the output in this console. But also, if that code does anything to our computer, we'll see it there too.
Oh, okay.
So the first 2 lines are something called import. So these are kind of like declarations, and what we're doing here is by default the Python doesn't include every single possible function or module that you might want to use, because if you don't need everything, I guess you shouldn't really include it. So what this says is we want the module web browser and we want the module time. Well, what does that mean? There's this thing called the Python standard library, and as you see, it has just a few things that you can do with Python. Most of this we're not interested in, but what we are interested in, I'm just going to do a find on the page, is the time module, or library, I should say.
Okay.
So there's a ton of information, but we figured out in the videos that we did with Udacity that we have access to a function called sleep through the time library, and we also have access to a bunch of different functions with the web browser library that help us do things to our web browser, which in my case is Safari, the default one on
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 Apple.
Mac. Yeah. So we figured out in our steps that we want to say, okay, so how do we access the clock? Well, that's with the time module. And if you were to read all of this, eventually you would figure out that there's a sleep function. So right here, time.sleep. So time is the module, and then .sleep is the function that's part of that module.
Okay.
So when I call time.sleep, for instance, in the console, which is just running the code live, you pass it an argument, which is the thing in between these two parentheses. Yeah. So it accepts an argument of number of seconds. So we can't just say like 2 hours and then it magically figures out what we mean. So for instance, if I wanted to sleep for 5 seconds, I could put the number 5 in there.
Right.
And when I run this, this is a good point. We actually need to first import the time module. It didn't work at first. Now that we have the time module, we can say time.sleep and we can say 5 seconds. Now notice nothing is happening,
Right.
but it will in a second.
And
Now it's prompted us for more input. So it waited 5 seconds and then did absolutely nothing.
right.
But that's going to be useful to us. So let's see, we've figured out this step, and now with the time module that we used, we know how to theoretically write code that would wait for 2 hours, because we would just do 60 times 60 times 2, and that would be 2 hours, right? But for our purposes, let's leave it at 5 seconds. So right here in my code, I have that time.sleep 5 seconds.
Right.
But what are we going to do before and after that to make sure that we open the browser and continue doing this 3 times, and that it automatically loops and we don't have to run this program every time? Well, I created some variables. So I have 2 variables here. They're variables because it's a expression, just some words, and an equal sign. And so we're setting those variables just like in algebra. Like
Right.
you say, for x equals 2 and y equals 3,
So
what's
they're
x plus
plugins.
y? Yeah. Not quite plugins. That usually has a different
Oh, okay.
meaning in computer stuff.
Okay.
But we're basically just saying that this thing, whenever you type this thing, right now, like breaks count, whenever I type breaks count, the computer understands that as the number 0. And whenever I type in breaks total, it understands that as the number 3.
Okay.
So here we have a loop, and it just says while, and that is basically the keyword that tells the Python interpreter that this is going to be a loop. And what it means is while something is true, meaning while something is correct, like it all adds up, then we're going to do all of these other things, all these other lines of code, until that statement that you pass it, or
Isn't
that
true.
condition, is not true. Exactly.
So that's why you have the breaks count plus 1, because it'll make the breaks count equal 0 plus 1 on the first time, and then 1 plus 1.
You're a very fast learner. We haven't even gone over that yet. So, what I'm saying is that while, like, imagine if you were doing, algebra or something, like, imagine that these are in parentheses, like these are kind of a separate thing,
Right.
right? You don't need to add parentheses in Python, but you do in some languages. So I'm saying while breaks count is less than breaks total, I could say plus, but that kind of wouldn't make sense. The loop would just run forever.
Right.
Which would be bad because it might crash our computer. I can say less than, I can say less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, etc., etc. But right now I want to say, okay, so far we've taken 0 breaks, and we want to take 3. So we need to do the difference of those numbers. So while the number of breaks we've taken is less than the total amount of breaks that we want, do all these things. This first line, don't worry about it too much, but it's just print something to the console saying program started at this time. So if I were to copy this code and paste it in here, see that it says sequence initiated, and then I added a function that gets the date and another of the instance of the same function that gets the time. So every time I run this function, it gives us a different time.
Okay.
Right? That's actually the current time of my computer.
Right.
So then we have our time sleep, which was step number 2, write code that waits for 2 hours, but for our purposes it's 5 seconds. Then right here I have breaks count plus equals 1, which you were mentioning. So this loop just keeps running. It runs the first line, runs the second line, runs the third and the fourth, and then it goes back up here and it says, okay, after everything I ran, is breaks count still less than breaks total? But down here we added 1 to breaks count because we ran our program once.
Right.
So when the interpreter gets back up to this line the second time, it'll be like saying while 1 is less than 3, and then it'll go like, okay, cool, that's still true, so we're gonna run everything again. Let me undo that. Okay. So then the last but not least, we use this web browser module. And again, if you were to look at the, read all the stuff about the web browser module in the Python standard library, you would know all these things that you can do with the web browser. But for our purposes, we know what that is, and we want to use the open function. Kind of like sleep. So time.sleep, sleep is a function of the time library, and open is a function of the web browser library. Then we again pass it 1 argument, the thing inside of the parentheses, and that argument is just literally a web page that we want to visit, a URL, which in this case is YouTube. So if we were to imagine how this program would work, it goes through, it says, okay, I'm starting at this time, it waits for 5 seconds, then what does it do?
Adds 1 to the break count.
Exactly. Then what do you think this line does?
It opens up the YouTube video.
Right. Then it goes, okay, is breaks count still less than the total amount of breaks? Well, it's 1 now, but we want 3, so yep. And the whole thing over again. Then at the end, it'll say, we've taken 3 breaks. The total breaks we want to take is also 3, so I guess I should stop. And it will do that.
Excellent.
We could even do it a billion times. So let's see how this runs. And remember, this is the console, so we'll see everything in real time as it happens. But
Okay.
since we're opening the browser, what we want is for a new tab in Safari to open and go to YouTube and make us take a break. So I'll just use this program for Python, and I will run my code. And we'll see that we have the sequence initiated, just like we wrote, and bam, our browser's open. And
Just got
it's opening again.
Right.
And it should open 1 more time. Yep,
Right
it's just
now.
refreshing the page because the browser's smart enough to know that we're on the same page. But in theory, that opened 3 browser
And all we'd
windows.
have to do is change the amount of time.
Exactly.
And it would be exactly where you want it to be.
Got it. You are now an IT professional.
Excellent.
Yep.
I think we need
And-
a lot more lessons, though.
Yeah. Well, for right now, I'd encourage you to just take 5
I will.
because you've had a good day at work. I appreciate everything that you've done for me, helping me in my educational pursuits. And yeah,
Fantastic, Sean.